If you want to get situated, we're getting our stream up and running.
We are ready. So now,
Okay, our YouTube video manager says that we are live and we are streaming. So welcome to everybody here at First Presbyterian Church. And welcome to people who are viewing online or are going to view online at some point. My name is Pastor Matt Paul. I'm pastor here at First Presbyterian Church of Port Angeles. And here to share with you about our Holy Land pilgrimage that I went on recently. So folks in the fellowship hall, if you can hear, we just need you to be a little more quiet, please. Which is a nice way of saying just be really quiet, I suppose. All right, so our trip was from October 13th through the 26th, and we had 21 participants, mostly from Washington State, although through family members from New Jersey, from Maine. A good friend of mine was supposed to be coming from Michigan, but was not able to make it due to some health concerns. And also our leader was from Minnesota. So we represented 4 states. And it was, during our trip, we visited a number of various holy sites, but we also met with a number of peacemakers. So in some ways, it was kind of an alternative sort of travel experience. And I'm going to try to touch on the major aspects of our trip, but mainly focusing on the places where Jesus trod. Ordering the presentation in the arc of his life and his ministry, which won't exactly be like our actual timeline. I'm going to have a separate presentation sometime in December, and I may do that by Zoom. I haven't decided yet, but that will be to pick up more of our experiences firsthand with peacemakers. So if you're interested in more of what's happening in Israel and particularly in Palestine, the West Bank, then you'll want to join me for that conversation a little bit later on down the line. We'll touch on a few of the current events that are happening here because you can't travel to the Holy Land without experiencing some of the things that are taking place in real time. As we begin, I'd like to give a special thanks to Libby Trost, who is a friend of mine since I was pretty young, and who inspired me to really read and prepare for this journey. Libby is an educator and served in Palestine 3 years in total, working with Lutheran-based schools there. And anyway, I'm really grateful for her, and she also let me borrow her presentation template for this PowerPoint, so give her a little bit of credit for that as well. What you're seeing here on this first picture above is this was taken in the old city of Jerusalem. In the foreground, the dome you see is the Ecce Homo Basilica. Ecce Homo meaning behold the man, from John 19:5, when Pontius Pilate has already examined Jesus and beaten him, and then he presents him back to the people and he says, behold the man. It is Ecce Homo, the basilica is located, if you will, between the second and third stations of the cross, again in the old city of Jerusalem. And if you look off in the distance there, just to the right, you'll see the famous Dome of the Rock, that golden dome, which is an Islamic shrine. It's part of the Al-Aqsa Mosque complex. We'll talk about the Al-Aqsa Mosque a little bit later on in the presentation. And then below is, anybody recognize what kind of flowers those are? I hear hibiscus. Is that what I heard? Jasmine. Jasmine flowers at the Weam Conflict Transformation Center in Bethlehem. And on our last visit to Weam, I stopped at a spot, and the scent of the jasmine was just overwhelming. It was one of the things I'll remember are some scents memories, and the jasmine that day are one of them. So we're going to follow the journey here as Jesus, according to Jesus' life, and we begin in Bethlehem, the city of Jesus' birth. Bethlehem was our home base during most of our pilgrimage, and you can see it circled here on the map to the right. Notice, by the way, how close Bethlehem is to Jerusalem. It's approximately 5 miles from the Damascus Gate in Jerusalem to checkpoint 300, the main entrance to Bethlehem. Checkpoint 300 is quite close, for instance, to the Weam Conflict Transformation Center that I just mentioned. The distance is a mere 5 miles, but as we'll see in the presentation, it's really a world away. It's complicated. That's a phrase that I heard countless times in the Holy Land. It's complicated. On the left is an olive wood ornament. It's typical of the kind of gifts that you can find in Bethlehem and, in fact, throughout the area. Olives, by the way, are a huge part of the cultural and economic identity of Palestine. On the right is an olive wood model of the dividing wall that separates Israel and the occupied West Bank. The state of Israel, citing security concerns, began construction of this wall in 2000 during the Second Intifada, or the Palestinian Uprising. And construction is ongoing, and it's literally separating the occupied Palestinian territory in the West Bank and Gaza from Israel. I think it's kind of interesting that you could find this olive wood decoration or this model. It shows a little bit of the Palestinian spirit, I think, that can maybe make light of this circumstance as well. I didn't purchase this, by the way, but I saw it there and I had to take a picture. Well, speaking of the dividing wall, to Palestinians, the dividing wall is a source of pain and frustration, which is, to put it quite mildly. But it's also become a place for protest art and a surreal sort of tourist attraction. My first journey into the Holy Land, my only journey there, was in 1989, which, as it so happens, coincided with the first Intifada that began in 1988. But the wall, as I mentioned, came about 12 years later. The anonymous street artist Banksy, some of you have heard of Banksy, has created a number of works that capture the ongoing conflict. And it's seen, for instance, in the middle here in the famous peace dove. And if you can see that, you see that the dove is wearing a Kevlar jacket. It has an olive branch of peace in its beak, and also, unfortunately, has a sighting right on its chest. The Waldorf Hotel was founded by Banksy, and it was meant to be sort of a temporary kind of an exhibit, if you will, but it remains open and you can actually stay there. It sports what they say are the worst views in Bethlehem. It stands just a few feet away from the wall. And if you look at the picture on the right, that's the dividing wall. That picture was taken virtually from the entrance of the Waldorf Hotel. So to give you a perspective, if you stay there and you had a view, you would see the wall. And then we happened to be in a little shop right about where you see the people here, and we stepped outside, and it was kind of we could call in photography, the golden hour, and the lighting was just great. And I said, "Hey, Charlie, take a picture of me really quick." So if I ever do an album, this is going to be my album cover. Make hummus, not walls. All right. There's got to be a song there, Wayne says. The West Bank, by the way, is home to 19 refugee camps administered by the United Nations, even to this day. We visited one of them, Ida Camp, which is home to some 6,000 residents on just a 10-acre site, 6,000 people on a 10-acre site. 2/3 of the residents in Ida Camp are under the age of 21. Imagine that. The key that you see here is a symbol of the Palestinian hope of return. Many were driven from their homes during the Israeli War of Independence, which the Palestinians call the Nakba, meaning catastrophe. Just about everything there, by the way, has Israeli and Palestinian names. And sometimes had a Palestinian guide. I was showing him a map, and all the names on my map were translated transliterated, I guess, from Hebrew. And so it took him a moment to recognize some of the names because they're Hebrew and Arabic. But the people who were driven from their homes still have their keys. And so you'll see that symbol quite often. And you'll see some more art there taken. You can see this child with a traditional Palestinian keffiyeh around her neck, sleeping against this home. And right at that seam there, you can see the keyhole. So now the next slide is an example of a Muslim call to prayer, which we heard several times during the day. And we experienced this particular one as we're visiting the Ida camp. And as you experience this, kind of notice just the scene around and look how close the buildings are built. It's a camp that's been in existence, I don't know the exact number of years, but several decades. So you think of a refugee camp, you tend to think of tents and so on. But as the time went on, people have built and built up. It's a custom among Palestinians to build upwards. And you'll see, I don't know if we'll see them in any of our pictures, but you'll see a home that's built, and at the top it's got rebar sticking up. And the idea is that you can just build more floors on top. And so as your family grows, for instance, you would build another floor for your children. And I went to a home that's under construction, had 4 stories. And the family, they're building it for the parents and for 3 levels of kids. And the parents would live on the bottom floor, and the kids, other families would live on successive floors going up. So here's the call to prayer. So it was really interesting to hear these calls to prayer at different times during the day. Really reminded you that you're in a far-off land. Well, here's a picture of Bethlehem, and one thing that struck me about Bethlehem is how hilly it is. And as we did some excursions, my roommate and I, around town, for instance, wherever we went, we had to go uphill one way or downhill another way. And just imagine a very pregnant Mary riding on a donkey up the steep hills and the rocky terrain of Bethlehem. And Joseph also went up from Nazareth to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, with Mary, his betrothed, who was with child. And while they were there, the time came for her to be delivered, and she gave birth to her firstborn son and laid him in a manger. The picture you see here is the Church of the Nativity, taken at dawn. You can see the sun coming up. And facing the opposite direction from this picture is Nativity Square, and you would see an equally impressive minaret rising above on that other side. So to enter the Church of the Nativity, you have to pass through what's called the humble door, and you can see me standing there. And if you look, you can see an outline of an arch that existed at one time, and of course a number of stones there that were put in later to make the entrance smaller. The Crusaders reduced the size of the entrance to prevent attackers from riding in on horseback. Can you imagine people on horseback riding into First Presbyterian Church and going up and down the aisle? In the center, you see the grotto of the Nativity, which is located underneath, if you will, the chancel area in the sanctuary. It's the site, of course, where Jesus is believed to have been born. And it's marked by a star, a silver star that's on the floor. And as you can see, it's quite a popular spot for pilgrims. You have to go down a few stairs to enter into this area. And I'll tell you, when you get down in there and there's a lot of people, It's not particularly large. It's very stuffy, and people are kind of milling about. And we actually caught it at a fairly quiet time. I understand you can go there at certain hours and have to wait quite a while to get in. So the next slide is a video of what we actually experienced as we entered the grotto that day. So you know how the rest goes, right? In heavenly peace. You can see right in front of the camera here, these are members from our group, and they are kneeling beneath an altar into that grotto that I showed you the picture of earlier. So with as many people there, you only have so much time. There's a little bit of a space off to the left, and when we went down into the grotto, there was a group of other travelers, pilgrims, who were singing. And in fact, that was quite a common experience when you go to the different holy sites, because there were tour groups from all over the world, and many of them have brought some songs to sing along the way. In fact, we did the same ourselves. Well, here's what the area looks like when it's not crowded. One morning, my roommate and I got up early, and it was our first Sunday actually in Bethlehem, and we went to the church in the Nativity, and we caught it at sunrise. The church was open, but when we got inside to the grotto, you can see on the left, we had to wait as they prepared it for the day. And so there was a priest down there putting out rugs and, I don't know, maybe lighting candles or whatever it is that he was doing. And one of the church workers there sitting at the entrance, and we sort of just waited until he took the chair away and invited us to go down. And while we were there, you can see on the right, a priest began to prepare communion at an altar just above that birth site. And in the middle is my roommate, Don, just offering a prayer at the site of Jesus' birth. The interesting thing about communion, by the way, is that you can notice that he's facing the back, he's facing away from everybody. And B, I thought that the family, you'll see in the next picture, I thought that the family that's there was part of this communion, but they weren't. So they just kind of stayed for a little bit, just like we did, and they left. So I'm not sure exactly how communion works in that particular tradition, but it's quite different than what we just experienced this morning. And by the way, I should say that after the presentation, we'll have time for questions and things as well. So, as you can see, again, it's quite different without the crowds. On the left is a Catholic church next to the Church of the Nativity. Again, we caught this at sunrise with the light streaming in. And on the right was that family I mentioned, a family from Africa that happened to join us in that pre-dawn visit to the Grotto of the Nativity. It was really a very different experience without anybody there. And I just will say that if you do find yourself in the Holy Land and you're willing to get up and go early, as we did on occasion, you can experience a lot more, apart from the crowds. So in that region, there were shepherds out in the field, Bible tells us, keeping watch over their flock by night. And the shepherds said to one another, "Let us go over to Bethlehem and see this thing that has happened." So in nearby Beit Sahur, a predominantly Christian town, you can visit Shepherd's Field, where the heavenly chorus announced the birth of the Messiah to a group of sleepy shepherds. And on the left, you can see what their fields look like. And it looks pretty barren to our eye, but I think to a shepherd and to sheep or goats, there is actually still stuff to eat. Even in a drier time like this. October is just as the rains start to come, and so the end of kind of the dry season. And when we were there, we had one day of some rain, but otherwise it's very, very dusty. Today, the site of the Shepherd's Field is a park, and there's a church and some fountains and different things there, several places to worship. including in caves that are there and an archaeological site as well. And you can see that symbol of the star that the wise men followed, and you see that symbol quite often in Bethlehem. And there, of course, the angel announcing Christ's birth. Well, on our first, let's see, did I skip? Oh, no. On the first Sunday in the Holy Land, we worshiped at Christmas Lutheran Church in Bethlehem. The service, I think I mentioned before, last week maybe, the service was in Arabic, but we were given English bulletins, and the pastor offered a welcome and a sermon summary in English. It was really, we felt quite welcome, even if there was very little that we really understood. I should be less modest and say there's nothing that I understood, other than the warmth and the smiles, and the invitation for us to participate. After the service, we enjoyed a time of coffee in the fellowship hall following the service, and you'll notice here how much smaller the coffee is. The coffee there is much stronger, and so it's served in these small cups. And it's common, actually, to enter a home or even a shop and have someone welcome you with a cup of hot coffee or tea. This happened many times. We just walk into any store, and all of a sudden, the person behind the counter gets up and pours a cup of coffee and gives it to us. Some of the coffee there is spiced with, I want to say it was cardamom. Does that sound right? That they would add to the coffee grounds when they brew it. So just try taking your Starbucks travel mug and filling it with all of these and see how well you do. But that could be an idea for here. It's a little less to do. Well, speaking of hospitality, on one of Don's and my pre-dawn walks, we passed by a bakery just down the street from the hotel where they were making fresh pita bread. And in fact, as we talked to the owner, he said that they provide the bread that we ate every morning and, at pretty much every meal over at the hotel. Well, I went close by to take a picture because the smell was just wonderful. I mean, fresh baked bread. And they offered us piping hot pita bread. And this happened on several occasions. It was amazing. If you see the baker there on the left, you can see how that pita bread is all puffed up still. And one morning I got a piece, kind of like what Don has, although it was more puffed up. And I made the mistake of biting right into it and got a face full of just really hot steam. But it was very tasty bread. Well, that happens that same afternoon, we ventured out into the desert southwest of Bethlehem toward the Dead Sea, and we had lunch at a Bedouin camp. We learned about their way of life and how it's changing under Israeli occupation. The meal that they served to us, you can see on the left, this was actually buried underground. So they make a series of like hot coals and things like that. And in the bottom of this, I think, are vegetables. And then on the rack are chicken. And what they would do is prepare everything on the rack, and they'd seal off the vegetables. And then they would basically put all of this down into a pit. With the hot coals, they put a covering over that, put some more hot coals on top of that, and then cover the whole thing and let it cook for several hours. And then we got to eat it when it was all done. It was really pretty cool. And by the way, this desert is where David fled from Saul. So if you look in the Old Testament, you see those experiences where Saul is quite often fleeing, or David fleeing from Saul. This is what you can picture. Camels, by the way, are a way of life to the Bedouins, so we're asking them questions about them. They mentioned that a good camel can fetch upwards of $10,000, which is a pretty good dowry for people who still practice polygamy, albeit kind of under the radar. So, and Here you see a picture on the left of one of the rooms that they had created. It was really hot, as you can imagine, out in the desert like that, hot and dry. But inside of this, it wasn't cooled or anything like that, but inside of this dwelling was quite comfortable. And you can see on the table a cup of, I think it was coffee there, or coffee or tea. And they might have had both, but again, that hospitality. Well, in order to adapt to restrictions on their movement, some Bedouin, like the ones that we met, are turning to alternative tourism to support themselves. So you can see the welcome here to Abu Ishmael tent. And so they have a number of experiences for travelers such as ourselves. And if you ever want to go, you can actually stay there. And out in the desert, I think the stars are pretty amazing at night. But of course, we were just there during the day for lunch. We visited Herodium. This is Herodium, or what's left of it, on the left. Herod the Great's summer residence. Herod the Great was the Herod, if you will, before Jesus was born. He ruled until 4 BC, but he's responsible for many building projects, including the Second Temple, which is the one that Jesus visited, and the one that was later, of course, destroyed in 70 AD. And the citadel of Herodium was used at different times after his death, and included a number of caves and things like that rebels actually used, Jewish rebels used as a home base. And here you see kind of a picture out from one of those caves. And you see the landscape from below. It's hard to get a sense of how tall that is, but from a distance, it is quite impressive, and it looks kind of like a cone, a cinder cone of some sort, to our northwest eyes. Herodium also included a lower palace, which you can see below, and that had a lower palace and several support buildings for the fortress. On the upper right, you can get a model of what the fortress must have looked like back in its day. And then down below, you can see the ruins there on the lower right. Herod was buried there, and he had instructions that portions of it be destroyed so as to create an artificial mountain. So you can see from that dwelling, everything that was there, and then portions destroyed so that all the rock and everything and the stones that went down created this effect of what we see more today, this artificial mountain. And so much of it has been excavated, of course, to be able to see it as we do. And up at the top there, we posed for a group photo from the top of Herodium. And really, the views were quite amazing. And here's a view from the top, kind of looking out. So one of the excursions we made from Bethlehem was to a particular place. Anyone want to guess from looking at these pictures where we were heading on this particular day? We were heading to the Dead Sea. And you can stop at this sea level marker here as you're driving your way down to the shore of the Dead Sea. And there was a Bedouin there with a couple camels, and offering for $5, you can hop on a camel and he'll just kind of walk you around, and you can take some pictures as some of our members did here, Sarah and her daughter Angelina. And several of our members took advantage of that opportunity. At the Dead Sea is also the Qumran site, and it's famous for the Dead Sea Scrolls that were discovered there by a Bedouin shepherd, tossing rocks into various caves, trying to locate a lost sheep or goat. And one of those rocks went into a cave, and he heard a crash. And it turned out to be the crash of a pottery vessel that was holding part of the Dead Sea Scrolls. In Jesus' day, Qumran was home to a religious sect that we call the Essenes, of which John the Baptist is believed to have been a member. So you can see in the upper right-hand corner there, these are ritual baths. And I can't remember the exact number, but the Essenes took, I don't know, I want to say like a half a dozen baths each day as part of their ritual cleansing. And yeah, it's kind of hard to imagine. And I can't remember exactly what's located on the right. I wonder if that might be some sort of a workshop area or a kiln, actually. But it's easy to imagine how dirty they would have gotten in the dry, dusty air by the Dead Sea. Well, of course, many people go down to the Dead Sea to float in the Dead Sea. It is the lowest place on Earth, 1,400 feet below sea level. Now, if you can look at the picture on the left, and you'll notice off in the distance, you see that kind of dark brown there, and in the foreground, you see see the ground and so on. Well, all of that area in the foreground of that picture on the left used to be underwater. But I don't have pictures of it, but if you travel down that way, you see a lot of agriculture right near the Dead Sea. They grow a number of different crops. We saw date palms, for instance, and bananas. But if you know anything, I'm just learning some things myself, but date palms and bananas require a lot of water. And it is because of all the water that's going to crops like these that don't normally grow in such an area that the water levels at the Sea of Galilee are declining at an alarming rate. Because of overuse in the Jordan River watershed, the Dead Sea is declining at a rate of 3 feet per year. So go there while you can. And so the sustainability of some of the agriculture there is really quite suspect. Here's another picture looking at the receding shoreline, and the water, by the way, in the Dead Sea is 6 times saltier than the ocean. So it's incredibly buoyant. It's hard to explain exactly, but you go in there, and it's almost hard to stand, actually. You just have to you just float. Yeah, by the way, don't get in your eyes, which I did just a little bit, and it was really painful. People use Dead Sea mud, by the way, as a skin treatment. So here's Joe and I. We decided that we'd give it a try. You kind of find the right spot, and you reach down in this mud, and you just kind of rub it all over yourselves. We didn't have enough time to get the full effect of letting it dry and then washing it off, but my daughter was asking, so was your skin nice and soft afterwards? And it really was. So there you go. And this went up on, I wasn't sure if I was going to show this to everybody else, but it went up on Facebook, and I know if I didn't include it, somebody here that's seen it on Facebook, like, where's that picture of you guys with all the mud on yourselves? All right. So from Bethlehem, we traveled with Jesus to up north to Nazareth and to Galilee. As we went up that way, I will say that away from the crowds of, in Bethlehem and Jerusalem, even though there were a number of crowds up in Galilee, that experience, as I'll share more about here in a moment, really was something that impacted me the most. And going up, by the way, up to Nazareth and to Galilee, we left the occupied occupied Palestinian territory, and we returned to Jerusalem or to Israel proper for that. Our first visit was to Nazareth, if we're following the life of Jesus, Joseph's hometown, and where Jesus was raised. We see here is the Basilica of the Annunciation. It's really quite an impressive building. It's built on the site of where it is believed that Mary was visited by the angel Gabriel. In the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent by God to a town in Galilee called Nazareth, to a virgin engaged to a man whose name was Joseph of the house of David. The virgin's name was Mary, and he came to her and said, "Greetings, favored one, the Lord is with you." But she was much perplexed by his words and pondered what sort of greeting this might be. The angel said to her, "Do not be afraid, Mary, for you have found favor with God. And now you will conceive in your womb and bear a son, and you will name him Jesus." And that apparently is the look that she gave Gabriel. So it's really a cool statue. Well, let's go inside. Now, if you, excuse me, if you look carefully at the picture on the left, you'll see up above is a modern structure, and you can see kind of a framing, looks like steel and concrete, holding up the floor of the level above us. But if you look at the stone in front of the people there and beyond some of those gates, you see that they look decidedly more ancient. And like pretty much every church that we went to, the Basilica of the Annunciation is built over several ancient churches. First century Byzantine, which is after 300 AD, Crusader churches, and of course modern. On the left is in the middle down below is the Grotto of the Annunciation, which is the site where it's believed that Mary received word from Gabriel. And on the right is the dome of the basilica, which is said to be the largest Christian church in the Middle East. I thought it was Hagia Sophia, which it would have been at one point, but in Istanbul, but that is now has been converted to a mosque. So whether it's true or not, it was quite impressive. And I will add that some of the things that we saw, it's like, I don't know, did that really happen here or not? It's hard to say exactly. But to be in that experience with pilgrims and things, it was really cool to see the body of Christ beyond what we just see in our area or our denomination. And it just so happened when I was down there, I wish I had recorded part of it, there was a mini service upstairs, so groups can reserve a space for, 10, 15 minutes, read scripture, sing a song, or what have you. And there was a woman singing a solo up above, and it was just resounding throughout the whole basilica, and it was just amazing. Let me go back here a second. Okay. So in Nazareth, we also visited the Sisters of Nazareth convent. It's built over, as I mentioned, many things built over the ruins of something else. It is built over ruins of what may have been home to the Holy Family. So I think they had constructed their facility and they had some sort of problem, I don't know, with water flowing someplace or whatever, and maintenance guys went to go look at what was happening, and they found that there was a whole bunch of space underneath, underneath the foundation. And so they went ahead and they dug out. This is all beneath structures that are up above, and the area was carefully excavated to unearth the things that you see here. So there are several sites that lay claim to maybe have been the home of the Holy Family or Joseph's workshop or something like that. But these ruins do date back to the first century. And so regardless, I did come away with a sense of what dwellings in Jesus' time might have looked like, in Jesus' hometown. And who knows whether he went to any of these, exact sites. And Nazareth was pretty small in that time, and I'll add I don't have any pictures to show you here, but Nazareth, like Bethlehem, is quite hilly. So there's the story when Jesus goes back to his hometown, and there's kind of this unbelief of the people, and they get mad at him and they want to throw him off of a cliff. Well, you can kind of imagine, that there were some cliffs or hillsides that they could have thrown him off and done some real harm. In Galilee, we stayed at the guest quarters at Mar Elias Elementary School, which is shown on the left in Ibilene, the town that I mentioned in the children's message today. And there we met with its founder, Abuna Elias Shakur, in upper right in the middle course. He's a retired archbishop in the Melkite Catholic Church. And while we're there, one of the highlights of the trip, aside from some of the religious sites, was the experience we had with high school students there. We met with some of the English students and just had a whole period of conversation. So kind of kids came and went, and we learned about their lives. We learned about what they kind of pick up about Western culture and things like that. And it was really a very pleasant experience. And as I mentioned also in the children's message today, from the rooftop of the school here, you could see the port city of Haifa, Mount Carmel, and off to the Mediterranean Sea. From Ibilene, and while we're still in the Galilee area, we traveled to a place called Zippori, or Sepphoris. You might have heard of Sepphoris or Sepphoris. Even though it's not mentioned in the Bible, it's mentioned, it existed, and it existed in Jesus' time. And it's only about 3 miles from Nazareth, where Zippori is today. So it's, again, not mentioned in the Bible, but there's some speculation that this town, which was quite prosperous in its day, might have attracted skilled labor from places like Nazareth, including carpenters like Joseph and Jesus. By the way, the word carpenter comes from the Greek word tekton, which actually might be better translated as builder or contractor. And, if you go to the region, you'll see that stone is the primary building material, not wood. So it stands to reason that Joseph and Jesus would have worked with stone as well as wood. So you can imagine that the two of them packing up their lunch pails and making the trip over to Zippori to work for the wealthy residents of the area there. There's an example in the upper right of one of the mosaics that you can find there. If you had a close in on the left, you can see kind of the shadow outlines of foundations, and inside of those you can see these beautiful ornate mosaics on all of these floors, signifying kind of the wealth of the community. This mosaic here is known to people it's a national park now, as the Mona Lisa of Zippori. And if you kind of walk in different angles, her eyes kind of follow you. And in the lower right, those are wagon ruts that date back to the Roman era. That's pretty cool to walk those stones. Here are the remains of a Roman era tower. Zippori dates back to around 100 BC. So as I mentioned, it was definitely around when Jesus was around. And when the Jews revolted against Rome in 66 AD, which led to, for instance, the destruction of the temple, Herod's temple in Jerusalem, the people of Zippori made a treaty with Rome, and that spared the town from destruction, so unlike Jerusalem. So it was home to the Sanhedrin through the second half of the third century, and once was home to 18 synagogues. There's more to the history there that I won't go into exactly right now, but I believe much of it was destroyed later in an earthquake. I don't know the date. So Jesus moved from Nazareth, of course, and he settled in Galilee. And here are some pictures from the Sea of Galilee. A little bit of creative filtering from Photoshop on the left. It was quite a hazy day, but your camera picks up a lot more than your naked eye does, and I'm glad that it picked up this scene. It was really a wonderful time. Galilee, of course, is where Jesus called his disciples, and he began his ministry. Going to Galilee turned out to be, as I mentioned, one of the highlights of the trip for me. And we did an exercise on the boat, and I see if I can find isn't there a pointer on here? Let's see all slides. Pen and laser pointer tools. Let me see if this works. Can you see that there? My laser pointer? Oh, great. Okay. So we did this exercise with the captain of the boat where he had us face to the north, which I believe from this angle is to the left. I might be, I think it would be to the right. And so we held out one arm pointing toward Magdala, which is in the red here, and to the right, just to the right of that mountain. And then we pointed 180 degrees to the opposite shore, where Jesus healed the Gerasene demoniac. So within that 180-degree arc, he pointed out, was where Jesus spent 2/3 of his ministry, there on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. So to see it kind of in perspective, it was really impressive. Yeah, so that's what he called the Valley of Magdala. So Magdala is there. We think of Mary Magdalene. And you can travel from there down to Jerusalem on what is called the Jesus Trail. So if you want a different kind of experience to do some hiking, we have some hikers here, let's go back and we'll hike the Jesus Trail to Jerusalem and see what that's like. Well, here is a picture of our group again on the Sea of Galilee. It was a very hot and humid day there. So some of us took advantage of the opportunity to dip our feet in the water. We learned something very interesting. Did you know that the Sea of Galilee is also below sea level? It's 695 feet below sea level, as a matter of fact, and it is the lowest body of fresh water on Earth. So it's quite interesting. And the water that day was just quite warm and pleasant. Anyone seen this mosaic before, perhaps? Mosaic of the loaves and fishes. We have only 5 loaves here and 2 fish, and they all ate and were satisfied, according to the gospel accounts. Well, we visited, this is called the Church of the Nutrition or Church of the Multiplication, aka the loaves and fishes, where Jesus is believed to have fed the 5,000. Now, here's a close-up of that famous mosaic, which is at the base of the altar, and we'll see that in just a second here. But Joan, our tour leader, asked us to count the loaves and count how many we see. So how many do you count there in the basket? 4, right. Well, let me pull that away, and you can see on the left is you can see the mosaic there at the base here of the altar, and the 5th loaf would be the one that is served on the communion table, and kind of signifying the ongoing ministry of Jesus to feed the hungry. I really love that sentiment. You're Peter, and on this rock I will build my church. You can see me with the statue there. There's Peter holding the keys to the kingdom, and you can see by my hand how polished that area is. So everybody goes there and grabs a hold of that staff and gets their picture taken. So I was no different. Matthew 16 records, and I tell you, Jesus says, Peter, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. So these pictures are from Capernaum, which was Simon Peter's hometown and where Jesus called his first disciples. The ruins at the top of the slide date back to a 4th century synagogue that's built upon the foundation of a 1st century synagogue. Everything's built on something else. And that 1st century synagogue is likely the one where Jesus worshiped and taught while living in Capernaum. So, and below are foundations from the ancient fishing village. And you wonder, did Jesus and his disciples hang out in any of those houses? Something to think about. I told you last week about a spaceship / James Bond looking church that's built above the foundation of Peter's home, and here it is. As a matter of fact, it looks like it could just sort of launch. It is literally hovering over Peter's home, and you can see that here, that light-colored stone on the right there. That is the light catching the foundation of what is believed to have been Peter's home. It's not far from the shore of the Sea of Galilee, so you can imagine him working there or living there rather, and getting out and just going the short walk over to his boats and so on. And, whether or not this was Peter's home, like with a lot of things, this is Capernaum, and he lived somewhere in this village on the shores of Galilee. And so when we walked there, we walked where the disciples walked, and we had a chance to see some of the things, the landscapes that they would have seen themselves. Well, from Galilee, we travel with Jesus on to Jerusalem. So we go back down to the south. And here on the left is a flag flying the Jerusalem cross. And you can see that it's kind of a different sort of a symbol here. Those 5 crosses marking the 5 wounds of Christ, his hands, his feet, and his side that was pierced on his crucifixion. As Jesus came near and saw the city, he wept over it, saying, "If you, even you, had only recognized on this day the things that make for peace, but now they were hidden from your eyes." Man, Jesus' words are as true, if not more so, as they were when he uttered those words. That view there you can see on the left is the Dome of the Rock. It's a Muslim shrine that's on the Temple Mount in the Old City. It's seen from the Mount of Olives area, looking across the Kidron Valley. And you can see a number of graves there. We'll have another picture with some more graves here in the next slide. And you can see on the right-hand side an Orthodox church on the Mount of Olives. And that's taken from a spot where Jesus is believed basically to have looked over Jerusalem and uttered those words and wept. Jerusalem really is a powder keg as far as things go, and we'll look more at that here in just a moment. Well, up on the Mount of Olives, so we're going kind of back up the hill, if you will. We drove up there and then we walked down from the top, and over on the upper left there was a group of women that were there, and they were waving a Yeshua flag, and you can see one woman holding a horn or a shofar, ram's horn, and they were just singing different praise songs to Jesus, reminding me of the scripture in Mark 14. When they had sung the hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives, and Jesus said to them, "You will all become deserters, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. But after I'm raised up, I will go before you to Galilee." On the right is a Jewish cemetery on the Mount of Olives, and again, to get your perspective, you can see the Golden Dome there in kind of in the middle of that picture, looking out at the old city of Jerusalem. This Jewish cemetery is highly sought after, I guess, to be buried on the Mount of Olives, in the holy city, essentially. And I read someplace that people pay upwards of $100,000 for the privilege of being buried there. So pretty expensive real estate. Then Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." And here is the outer entrance, if you will, to Gethsemane. And on the right is one of the olive trees that you can find in a grove there. And note how enormous that trunk is. Nothing really there for scale. We'll have another picture here in a second with maybe a better view, but it's just enormous, kind of gnarly looking thing. I guess it's hard to date olive trees. I think olives are grafted and things, so it's not like there's one fruit-bearing tree that trunk supported, but probably many over the years, the decades, the centuries. But apparently, some of the trees in the Garden of Gethsemane are among the oldest on earth, and very likely do date back to Jesus' time. So imagine, imagining, this spot There's something about some of the places where we went that I really, I'm not sure if some things are really where that happened, and there are other places where it's like I really felt it, whether it was or not. It was to go to the garden like that was really, really amazing, and it would be cool to go back at night, but we didn't have that time. Well, here's a close-up on the left of an olive tree that was actually taken back in the Galilee area. But you can see kind of that gnarly trunk. This one being much smaller than the one that we saw at in the Mount of Olives or in the Garden of Gethsemane. And while we were there at WIAM, the Conflict Transformation Center, we got to help harvest olives. And so, one of the things that you do, if you look on the right, you can see a tarp that's spread out underneath the olive tree. Getting into all the olives, the trees are all dusty, and it's just kind of hard work, and the olives really blend in. Green olives are just kind of younger ones. Those are made more for oil, and you can eat them too. But the black ones are the ones that generally are the ones that they use to eat. So they just stay on the tree a little longer. One of our members tried an olive, off of the tree. I don't know if you ever had an olive off the tree, but they are soaked in brines and things like that for several weeks or months before they're eaten. The only thing that they're good for right off the tree is to be pressed for their oil. So the oil that is pressed from these trees is sold at WIAM, and it goes to support their work and their ministry. So you pluck all of the olives off, and they fall onto the mat or the tarp, and you kind of pick up the tarp, and you can gather up all of the olives from it. So here's another scene in the lower left, back to the Garden of Gethsemane, and there's a volunteer who was working at harvesting olives there. And she came over to our group and handed my roommate actually a handful of olive leaves to hand out to our group. So I've got a few olive leaves from the Garden of Gethsemane at home. It's kind of cool. And the scripture reads that then Jesus withdrew from them about a stone's throw, knelt down and prayed. Now look at the stained glass, okay? The stained glass right below the screen there. Knelt down and prayed, "Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done." So the Church of the Nations is next to the Garden of Gethsemane, and it's built over what is believed to be the rock where Jesus prayed. And you can see that there right in front of the altar is this rock area that's kind of fenced off by really crowns of thorns, I guess, that are right there. And you can see in the piece in the dome behind the communion table or the altar is a depiction of Jesus on the rock, as you see in the upper left as well there, that little carving that I saw. But it brings new meaning to see that rock. I thought of you, and I thought of this place as we walked into that church. It's really cool. I don't have other pictures to show you here today, but by the way, if you go to my Facebook page, those of you who are on Facebook, or if we're not friends, you can friend me, and I have more pictures and captions from throughout the trip if you want to see them. But what was really amazing about the Church of the Nations was the architecture inside, and the stained glass and everything was designed to make it look like it's night, and has those colors, and it really had this effect in there. It doesn't capture it so much on this in this shot, but it was pretty cool. We also visited, when we were there, Yad Vashem, which is a Holocaust memorial and museum outside of Jerusalem. In a garden there, my grandparents, Willem and Polonia Paul, and you can see their names right here, Willem and Polonia Paul, are recognized and remembered among the righteous of the nations. And you can see above the names there, that's the garden area, the righteous of the nations. where the names of the righteous are listed by country. So my grandparents are in the Netherlands section. They're recognized as people who sheltered Jews during World War II. So to be honest with you, I can't tell you much more about Yad Vashem. We didn't have a lot of time there, and while my tour mates were going through the museum and so on and other parts of the grounds, I spent most of my time over in the garden. It took me a while to find it, which is a whole other story. But once I found it, I just spent some time and took some pictures and meditated and just honestly wept. It was just a nice connection with grandparents that I've only met my grandmother, and really my only memory of her is when she had already was pretty advanced with dementia and things. So I never met my grandfather. So it was pretty cool. And by the way, he was a young man, a boy when they sheltered him. He is still alive. He lives in Israel. He emigrated there with his parents after the war. His parents were taken to a concentration camp, I think Treblinka, I want to say. And because he was a doctor and she was a nurse, they were spared and they had to treat other people in the concentration camp, but they survived the camp. So anyway. I've not met him in person, but I've corresponded with him. In fact, I owe him an email later on today, maybe. Get home. All right. So we visited. This is the Dome of the Rock. You've seen pictures before. It's kind of the most iconic thing that you're going to see when you see pictures of Jerusalem. It is the site, and by the way, that's real gold on top of there. The site where Muslims believe that the Prophet Muhammad ascended into heaven. And it's a shrine that's built over the stone that you see on the left, this big rock. And Muslims believe that that's where the Prophet Muhammad ascended into heaven. Jews believe that this is the site where Abraham, remember, nearly sacrificed Isaac. That's where he set Isaac down on this stone. And it was then that he looked over and he saw a ram whose horns were caught in a thicket. And he sacrificed that lamb instead of his only son. Our Muslim guide told us that it's just a rock. He said, it's just a rock. And there's a little spot where he goes, put your hand in there and touch the rock, and smell your hand. Do you smell that? And well, there's tradition that believes that when Muhammad was raised into heaven, he left a wonderful scent from his feet, on this rock. And he said every day they go and they put down some perfume on the stone right there. But it was really a special privilege that we had to tour the Al-Aqsa Mosque. It's really a complex, so the shrine is part of this larger complex. But to go inside the shrine and to go into the Al-Aqsa Mosque is something that non-Muslims generally are not allowed to do, not since the year 2000. That's the year, by the way, of the Second Intifada when it was sparked. Ariel Sharon, you may recognize his name as he was a former prime minister of Israel. I think he was running for prime minister at the time. He took a stroll through the Al-Aqsa complex along with hundreds of riot police, and that sparked an uprising known as the Second Intifada, and a lot of people died because of the conflict from that. Now, I'm sure there's probably more to the story that who started what and when and all that kind of stuff, but that's some of the facts of the circumstance. Now, when we were there, our guide told us when we started that this is kind of ground zero to a lot of trouble potentially, and Jerusalem is a very conflicted place. If you look closely at the center of the picture on the left, and I'll kind of outline, see where the mark there. There's two men there. A Jewish man in a light-colored shirt just above the brim of, right at the brim of Joe's hat there. And he's walking alongside an Israeli police officer. And this, again, is in the Al-Aqsa mosque area, which is in East Jerusalem, which is part of the occupied Palestinian territory. So you can go into Jerusalem, and part of your experience there is going to be in occupied territory, and others part of Israel proper. And it's a tense location, and our guide cautioned that anything could spark violence at any time, such as a Jew seeking to provoke tensions by praying or maybe demonstrating in the mosque complex. And it's kind of hard to imagine, what that might be like. I guess what might be close is if, in the middle of our worship service, somebody were to, maybe pull out a prayer rug and start praying right in the middle, right in the middle of the middle aisle of our sanctuary. Or whatever, and that wouldn't even come close to the kind of tensions that are felt there. On the right, you can see screens there. These brown screens. See those light marks in there. I don't have a better picture of it, I'm afraid, but those are bullet holes from rubber bullets fired by Israeli Defense Forces during a raid on the mosque last May. And if you look up above here, this larger hole here in the stained glass, that is from a larger object, perhaps a tear gas canister or a stun grenade that broke through the stained glass window during that siege. And again, that was just May of last year. I found some a news article and some pictures from it, and I recognized where they were because that's the space outside where we took off our shoes before we went in to the mosque. It's very, very recognizable. And while we're on the subject of, what is occupied territory, what's Israel proper, and so on, everything is sort of kind of close together. And I'm not sure how well you can see from this picture, but this is a picture from our balcony at our hotel. Looking out, this is Bethlehem in the foreground. You can see where I'm tracing here. This is a part of that dividing wall. I'm not really sure why it makes that particular course, but there it is. And this area up here, I'm not 100% sure whether that's a settlement in the ridge or an Israeli development. So the distinction would be that a settlement are homes that are built by the state of Israel on occupied territory, which according to international law is illegal. So there are certainly a number of settlements such as that in the area. I'm just not certain about that. But you can see, from the architecture and everything, they look like they'd be quite comfortable places to live, with the exception of, things like dividing walls and, all that kind of stuff around it. This next picture here, if you're confused about where you are in the Holy Land and you're not sure if you're in Palestinian territory or in Israeli territory, one thing that you can do is look for these things. See these black objects on the tops of these buildings here. I'm kind of tracing there. Those are they're water tanks. Palestinian homes have water tanks on their roofs to store water in the event that the water is shut off. They're not cisterns per se. They don't collect rainwater. In fact, there are restrictions by the government against, taking water like that. So they are filled from their water system. I would imagine that when the water's on, those tanks are full, and when the water gets shut off, they use the water from those tanks. And you know that you're in Palestinian territory because you see those tanks, and Israeli homes do not have those at all. And yet, Israelis and Palestinians all get their water from the same Israeli agency. If the water's turned off for more than their tank will hold, then Palestinians have to buy water from water trucks at several times the cost of water from the public system. And your guess is as good as mine as to why the water would get shut off. Back to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and this is inside. I wanted to show for woodworkers here, on the left, this is called a minbar or pulpit. It was installed in 2007 at a cost, I found, of approximately $1.5 million. Why was that so expensive? Well, it replaced a priceless 1,000-year-old minbar that was destroyed in a fire in the mosque that was set by an Australian Christian extremist in 1969. The minbar it was a priceless, it was a 1,000-year-old priceless pulpit, and the science or the engineering behind its construction was lost, and that's why it cost so much money and took 37 years to build a new one, because this minbar is made of wood and it contains no glue, nails, or screws to hold it together. And I can see Wayne like, oh my gosh, can you imagine? On the right is additional worship space at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is located beneath the mosque on the left. This is underneath that area, and it is in an area that used to be a Crusades era stable. So the hole, if you can see this hole in the stone here, do you see that? That hole was where a rope would be affixed and then it could be tied around a horse's leg. The area is just enormous. They said, because they will pack people in, worshipers at certain holy days, they can hold tens of thousands of people in this space underneath. It's amazing. And notice the arches on the carpet here. Any idea what they represent? Yeah, they all face Mecca. Exactly. Good eye there. Well, as I mentioned, things being complicated. Not far is the Wailing Wall. Jews believe that the Wailing Wall, or the Western Wall, is the only remaining portion of the temple, Herod's temple, Herod the Great's temple. And you can, partly why they believe that to be the case, notice how large some of these stones are. And if you pull back and you look at it, you can see these large stones down below, and you can see stones of various eras up above. And, the place is so ancient, and, the stones have been used and reused multiple times, and they just, it just kind of is. And so I had asked about a colonnade that I saw outside of the Dome of the Rock, and it looked like kind of a Roman era colonnade. And our guide said, well, yeah, that they just kind of used because what was there. And so anyway, so you see these quite large stones that date back to Herod's temple, and so here people are placing their prayers in the cracks between the stones, and they're gathered, by the way, the prayers periodically. They're all gathered up, so they're not there, forever. They're gathered and they're collected and buried, actually. And so on the right, you can see Joe Rivera from our group placing his prayer in the wall. And if you look carefully, just notice that it looks like he's taken a picture of himself putting his prayer in the wall as well. So. Yeah, and going back, just in the same fashion, I suppose, as a Jew starting prayer in the Al-Aqsa Mosque area, I don't know exactly what would happen if a few people took out prayer rugs and started praying there, during Muslim prayer time. I'm not 100% sure, but, again, it's a very volatile area. All right, so in Jerusalem, we walked the Via Dolorosa. I mentioned from the very first picture from Ecce Homo, that basilica there, located between the second and third stations. So we kind of traveled the various stations. I think there are markers that were put up not too long ago. So maybe if some of you have been before and you're like, I don't remember those, well, it's because they probably weren't there. But they're there now, and our guide kind of took us through the narrow ancient streets of Jerusalem to find those. And in those narrow streets, you can find all kinds of goods in the old city, including some of your Oregon Duck gear, if you're so inclined. Anybody goes, I didn't get one of these shirts, I wear a large, if you want to pick one up for me when you're there. I didn't get it because I didn't know exactly what it said in Hebrew, and you know how it is. People get tattoos in foreign language, and it's like doesn't say what they mean. But anyway, you can find all kinds of goods in the old city, and it's quite surprising. Because you can walk through there and you see all kinds of tourist stuff, like the stuff on the right here. But you also find butcher shops and grocery stores and produce places and things like that because people live there. And so amongst all those kitschy souvenir shops, you'll find all of your needs: furniture shops, clothing stores, and Oregon wear with a Hebrew flair, of course. It's pretty cool. And what was kind of cool? I posted this on Facebook, and somebody else remembered that same spot, and it's just a little spot right along the pathway there as you're walking it. And so anyway, it's kind of fun. All right. You can see from this, well, maybe not this slide here, but we're getting close to the end here. Why do you look for the living among the dead? This is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where we are. It's a site where Jesus is believed to have been crucified and buried. Now, there was some speculation at one point that maybe this wasn't, the argument is, well, that's probably not where he was buried because you couldn't bury somebody within the walls of the city. But at that time, where the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was outside of the old walls of the city. So it makes a compelling point, and we'll talk a little bit more about that here in just a moment. So it's believed where Jesus was crucified and buried. Now, it's primarily run by Armenian, Catholic, and Orthodox churches under what's called the status quo agreement. What does the status quo mean? No change, basically, keeping things the same. People in the church should know what status quo is. That's kind of our unwritten mantra a lot of times. So written under the status quo agreement, meaning that they must all agree, and those are the three, they're minor other varieties of Christian churches that are there too, but they must all agree to an action before it's performed. So if you look up on the left, you'll see a ladder here placed below this window. You see that there? Well, that ladder on the left was placed there in the early 18th century. Okay, we're in the 21st century now, right? So 300 years ago. Apparently, all the parties cannot agree to move it. So it remains. Now, I'm guessing at some point it's probably a point of pride, tourists will notice that and everything. But for a long time, before all that, it for whatever reason, it's remained. So you kind of know what to look for when you go there. Over on the right is the dome that's above the edicule. Edicule is Latin for little house. And you'll see in the next slide here, it's a little house, if you will, that is built over Christ's tomb. And the rays emanating from the light remind us that Jesus is not here, but he is risen indeed. Almost more inspiring, I think, than the edicule itself was looking up at that dome and remembering the light that goes forth from the tomb, the empty tomb. Well, the edicule, was restored in 2017 by a team of Greek antiquities preservationists. They ran scans of the walls here, these outer walls, I think on the two sides. And what they found was that two sides had been built over actual cave walls. When they opened the tomb, and they had to do this because so before the preservation, and what I remember from '89, there was a steel structure built around this, holding it in place. Because again, they couldn't agree with what to do exactly, and so they had to build a steel exoskeleton, if you will, to hold the structure upright. And but it was, the structure was crumbling, and they needed to do something. So they decided that what they needed to do was pour concrete, liquid concrete in there to fill voids and to kind of strengthen the whole area. But what they were concerned about was that it would go in and filter in and cover, there's a tomb area inside that's kind of been sealed off. And so they had to get permission to go in there to be able to seal that area off so that it wouldn't fill with concrete. When they opened the tomb, that sealed area, it hadn't been opened in centuries, they found a concrete slab. And when they cleared away all the debris, it was broken, that there was a concrete slab that was broken and had a portion of a cross on it. And beneath that is stone, which is the slab where Jesus' body is believed to have been placed. Back in an earlier picture in Nazareth, I didn't explain it, but it was a tomb where basically what would happen is they'd put the body on probably a stone or maybe on the ground or on some sort of a shelf or a table. And after the body, after a period of time when the body decayed, they would take the major bones and put them in niches. And that picture showed some niches in the background there. So this slab was believed where Jesus' body would have laid. And of course, he didn't have time to decompose or anything like that. But when they found it, they weren't sure. They weren't expecting that concrete, and they wondered if maybe that had been placed there much later, and so on. Well, they dated the concrete back to the 4th century A.D., which would be consistent with the time frame in which Emperor Constantine, remember Emperor Constantine in, was it 324, I want to say, somewhere in there, converted to Christianity. And when he did, the Roman Empire converted to Christianity, and his mother set about preserving holy sites that were destroyed by the Romans. So for 300 some years, the tradition, the oral tradition had continued that these are the places of the holy sites, and she restored the major holy sites in the process. So over the centuries, the Romans had built a pagan temple on the site of believed to have been Jesus' tomb. And so what they found then in that concrete slab, meaning that that's the spot that she found and that they preserved. And the fact that the walls are actual stone sides of a cave, it really lends a lot of credibility to that being the site where Jesus' body may have lay. What's really interesting, by the way, is that so they had to dig through all the the rubble of tear down this pagan temple in order to get to it. Well, what happens today is each Easter a priest enters the edicule with a candle. But before the priest enters, he's searched to make sure he doesn't have any kind of matches or flint or anything, or lighters or anything, incendiaries. And the edicule itself is searched as well to make sure nothing's hidden in there. And miraculously, each Easter, the priest will emerge with a light, a candle that is lit. And, miraculously lit, or maybe semi-miraculously, as in the Dome of the Rock. I don't know exactly. But there's a great celebration, and the candle goes out, and flames are lit from that, filling that whole space with light, from coming forth from the empty tomb. That flame is shared and even flown on planes in special compartments or something, so that the light of Christ, if you will, can go forth out into the world. It's a really cool tradition. It'd be kind of cool to see sometime. On the right, pilgrims are seen here at the site where it's believed that Jesus' body was prepared. Remember, it was wrapped up before it was placed in the tomb. And so what are they doing there? You can see a number of souvenirs here. They were laying souvenirs out on the table, presumably to bless them before they brought them home. So it was kind of a chaotic, experience. So we ended our pilgrimage with a celebratory dinner in a restaurant that was 700-year-old building. So cool. I want to give special thanks. On the left, you can see Joan Deming. She is our leader. She's a retired Methodist minister and organizer from Meeting Peacemakers. And on the left is Zugbi al-Zugbi, director of the Palestinian Conflict Resolution Center in Bethlehem. And he was really he is a wonderful spirit and a wonderful guide through portions of our journey. And we really enjoy learning about the work that he and WIAM do. And they were both really awesome. Joan, in particular, really went above and beyond, and had to adapt many times. There were some tensions and uprising things that took place when we were there, and so she had to adapt and change our schedule around a little bit. But she has all kinds of connections to the area, and that really helped a huge amount. Now, there's so much more that I could share, and that's why I'm going to have a separate presentation to share about our meetings with peacemakers throughout the pilgrimage. I mean, there's so much more that I didn't talk about today, but I'd be happy to visit with those of you who want to learn a little bit more. But I want to open up now for some questions. I'm going to work down to the front of the sanctuary. I'm sorry it went a little bit longer than I kind of expected, but have some time for some questions if you want to stay. And I kind of end with Salam Alaikum, Shalom Alaikum, which is, or Alaikum, peace be with you, in Arabic, in Hebrew, and of course, in English. So I'm going to work my way downstairs. If you want to change the camera, maybe get the lights on here and see what kinds of, if anybody has any questions that I might be able to answer. Oh, yeah, those glasses might help too. Hand me that case too, will you please? All right, great, thanks. Okay. Yeah, so there's a lot. I should add as well that I am really committed to taking part or leading a trip in 2 years with Joan. So if you are interested in going, would like some more information about it, please let me know. I mean, not to commit to anything today, but I'd be happy to give you some of the details about it and so on. But any questions? Yeah, go ahead.
What's a good time of year to visit?
Oh, that's a good question. A good time of year to visit. Joan said, if you could go in the spring, like in March, you can really see a lot there. One of the things that really struck me was that, that picture at sea level and everything was so bare. That's green in the spring. Yeah, and it's not much. But, when you think of the shepherds keeping watch over their flocks and things like that, it's not like what we'd imagine here in the Northwest, But there's enough there that, it dries out and it's still there. Now, the Bedouins can't move as much as they used to, and so they have to get feed and things to feed their flocks. But back in the old time, they would move around where they could find nutrients and things. Yeah. So, yes.
Thought of yours?
What did I learn and changed me? I learned a lot more about the ongoing conflict, Israeli and Palestinian conflict, and one thing that struck me is that my parents, those of you who don't know, my father's Dutch and my mom's Japanese, and so my parents both lived under foreign occupation for a time, my dad when he lived under Nazi occupation in Holland, and it realizing I never really put it together, occupied West Bank, what that really meant. Yeah, I just thought it was a name, and you realize, well, this is, Palestinian territory marked off by the United Nations and so on that is occupied by Israeli forces. And so it just kind of dawned on me the idea of living under occupation and what that might mean. And I can't quite imagine, what it would be like to live under occupation for decades. These refugee camps, as I mentioned, I mean, you think of something quite different, but these are camps that are still administered by the United Nations, that are recognized camps. Yeah. Rainey?
How long have those refugee camps been open?
Yeah, I don't have the exact.
Born into that and grow up in there?
Yeah. Some I don't know the exact dates, but some of them date back to 1948, and the Israeli War of Independence, or the Nakba, the catastrophe that the Palestinians would call it. So yeah, some of them date back that far.
Their birth certificates say.
I think that's probably complicated too. Many of them are actually, because the hospital facilities are limited, it's not uncommon that they would be born in Jerusalem area, like on the top of Mount of Olives. There are several people that we met that were born there. The Mount of Olives is part of a Palestinian area, but that's where their hospital facilities are. So it's very limited. Which does bring to mind, by the way, I want to share a couple resources if you want to learn more, and I'll have these up here if you want to take a look at them. I've got a map of Israel, if you kind of want to look at it here. I used the Lonely Planet guide, was really kind of helpful along the way. But I mentioned Libby Trost before. She really inspired me. She sent me this copy of The Lemon Tree, for instance. The Lemon Tree, an Arab, a Jew, and the heart of the Middle East. I've mentioned it before. It is the story of, it's a house built by a Palestinian family in the 1930s that when they were forced out of their home. In fact, where we had dinner at that 700-year-old place was not far from where this home is. And in fact, the woman, a Bulgarian Jew, she was 1 year old when her parents immigrated to Israel from Bulgaria after the war. She was raised in that house, and she's the one that introduced Joan to the restaurant that we had dinner on our last night. And anyway, her name is Dahlia. And anyway, she begins to question the stories that she'd heard about their, the home. And, the idea that the Palestinians just fled and they just never came back, and it's like, well, no, they were driven away and they couldn't go back, in this particular case. So she begins to kind of question it, and one day she gets a visit from a young man who was the son. He grew up in that house up until, I think, age about 6 or so. And after, 20 years later, he and his cousins went back to their hometown, and they sought out their homes where they had lived. And Dahlia let them in and welcomed them. And the lemon tree is derived from a lemon tree that the Palestinian family had planted there in that home, and grew up until, I think, fairly recently when they had to replace it. But you chart the history of Israel and Palestine through kind of that home, and the author does a lot of detailed research putting the story together, and it's really pretty interesting. And they have very different views, by the way, about how to solve the issue. And one of the things that's really maddening is that in reading the book, at some points I wanted to side with one person or the other, and it's like, it's not that simple. You really can't. So that's another book, The Lemon Tree. This is We Belong to the Land by Elias Shakur, Father Shakur. I haven't read this one. I just bought this when I was there. He's written a book called Blood Brothers, and that's one that we did read, and I'd recommend that to you. It's also available on the Washington Anytime Library. You can listen to it if you want. And I'm not sure about The Lemon Tree, but the last book I'll mention is a Paragon, which is a polygon with, and I pulled it up here. Oh, I close it off. A polygon with an infinite yet countable number of sides, if you will. So it can go off to infinity, but it's always countable, if you will. Which would approximate kind of a circle. And his his storytelling is amazing. If you have a chance to listen to it, it's really remarkable. Plus, he's Irish, and so his accent's really cool as well. But he talks about the conflict mainly through the story of two men who are part of called Combatants for Peace, and also members of a parents' circle. Combatants for Peace, they're Israelis and Palestinians who have fought on either side of the conflict, who are working dedicated toward peace. And these men also share their stories in a parents' circle, which are parents and family members of people who have lost loved ones, children in the conflict. And so we met with members of a parents' circle when we were there, and I mentioned that, I think, to you. But as a reminder, there was the Israeli man, his daughter was in the Israeli Defense Forces. She was killed by a suicide bomber. And the Palestinian man, he and his family were driving in Bethlehem, not far from the Church of the Nativity. The Israeli Defense Forces were looking for some suspects. Their car apparently they were kind of in the wrong place at the wrong time, and the Defense Forces opened fire on them. He was wounded. His family members were I think they were all wounded, and his daughter was killed. But they share their stories with one another. They meet with people, and they use their pain, if you will, as kind of their weapon toward peace. So, A Paragon, The Lemon Tree, Blood Brothers are all books that I would recommend that you kind of take a look at if you'd like to learn a little bit more. Yeah. Are there any other questions? And again, you can also come back to, again, whenever I do the next presentation, I'll be happy to talk a little bit more about what's happening there. We heard some amazing stories. Leela?
Yes, I have a second cousin that lives there. Did you experience that?
Yeah, so she was saying her cousin is there immigrated there from Romania, and she was talking about several checkpoints. Yeah, if you're going back and forth into the occupied territory, there are checkpoints. I have pictures and stuff. There are signs that technically it's illegal for Israeli citizens to cross over into occupied territories. The territories from the Oslo Agreement are divided up in different regions. There's areas. There's Area C. Area A is under Palestinian Authority control. Area B, I believe, is kind of joint control. And Area C, which constitutes much of the West Bank, is Israeli control. Yeah, and so there's a lot more that can be said about that, but yeah, and the Palestinians have white license plates, and Israelis have yellow license plates. And I'm told that the Israeli license plates can go back and forth, but the Palestinian license plates can only stay in the occupied areas. Yeah, Leila, another question.
Did you even hear some, like the Hebrew name of Jerusalem?
The Hebrew name of Jerusalem? No, what? I can't repronounce that, but yeah. And it's also, again, it's Al-Qud in Arabic. So anyway, one last question maybe, Rainey? Yeah.
You talked about how they can't go over certain borders. We experienced during COVID shortages and supply chain problems. I imagine that must be a huge ongoing thing. Did you guys talk about that at all?
We did some, and again, I could go more detail in another presentation, but we met with members of OCHA. I can't remember the acronym now, but it's a UN organization. They're dedicated to kind of relief efforts in Palestinian territories or Palestinian territory. And they were talking about the situation in Gaza, which is different. Gaza is pretty well sealed off from the rest of Israel. There's one passenger entry point in and out of Gaza. And I think there are maybe just a couple transit points. There's a blockade, so they can't enter from the sea. And the restrictions on goods that are coming, going in to Gaza are very restrictive. And so anything, because that's under control of, I want to get it right, is it Hamas or Hezbollah? Anybody know? Hamas? Or well, it's not Palestinian Authority. West Bank has a different, that's covered by the Palestinian Authority. I have to look, it's either Hamas or Hezbollah. We didn't go to Gaza, so I don't know 100%. But yeah, because of that, there are restrictions on what can go in and out. So anything that could be used kind of multi-purpose, if you will, to develop weapons or something like that from it, they're not allowed to go into Gaza. So their supplies and things like that are much more limited. And the experience there, as we understood it, is kind of more dire. Yeah. So, but there's a lot of ongoing, violence that kind of, going back and forth and stuff from that area. So it's all complicated. Hey, I'll stay a little bit afterwards for other questions. Bev is waving her hand. One last one.
I just want to say thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. Yeah, well, like I said, I'm happy to stay and talk a little bit more, but thank you, and thank anybody who's still with us online or will be joining us. Really appreciate your time and your attention.